Welcome back to Human Nature. I'm Jamie Clements.
I'm Louis Blake.
And today we are joined by TJ Power. TJ, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here. TJ is a neuroscientist at Dose Lab and the author of the fantastic Dose Effect. And we're going to be talking a whole lot more about all of that great work and your story and everything that's gone into getting you to where you are today. But first of all, how are you doing?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me on, guys. This is really cool.
Yeah, very happy to have you here. So the question that we always start with, and we spoke a little bit about this before.
Without giving it away, though.
Without giving the question away, because we always like to start the episode with this. So with no reference to your past or your work, who is TJ Power?
A very focused human being that has always had some kind of artistic desire to get very good at a skill, I'd say.
I like it.
Would you say being focused is something that comes easy for you, or is it something you've had to learn?
I had pretty significant OCD growing up from super young age.
Me too.
And I found the only way to navigate it was to channel the obsessiveness into something effectively. And since I can remember, whatever I have got interested in, I've got very, very interested in it and got very laser focused on it. And that's how I basically spent my whole life.
Are you aware of the initial trigger of your OCD?
I think it's something that is within my family, many family members have it. And we had a complicated period between the ages when I was about 5 to 9 years old as a family, lots of turbulence and unease. And I think maybe as a young person that couldn't contribute to organizing the actual family, I started organizing what I could, which created some obsessive and compulsive behaviors.
Yeah, I've got a lot of background with that. It's something that's come up for me a lot, but maybe pushed away. I was actually put on Prozac when I was a kid to offset because it was so bad. It took over my life to such an extent. It's only recently that I've kind of gone back to root cause, resolve that, and it's meant that probably for the last 6 months it's not shown up at all.
Beautiful.
Which is, life is completely different.
Wow.
Maybe unaware to the extent of which it impacted my life whilst it was there, because you just accept it as normal that it's always been there, right?
For sure, it controls your whole experience in your mind, basically.
Exactly.
So, yeah, that's beautiful to hear that your mind feels calm.
And how did it show up for you? What was kind of the presentation of that day to day, and how did that influence the path that you ended up on?
Yeah, I mean, I was a super young kid when they started, and I created concepts in my mind of being in the middle of the night and telling myself if I don't go outside to the garage and hit a light switch 5 times, then this negative thing will happen to my family. And even as an adult, I don't want to go outside to a garage in the middle of the night, let alone as a 5-year-old kid. It was the scariest thing in the world. And the challenging thing with OCD is obviously as a young kid, I'd go hit the light switch, nothing bad would happen to my family. And then it began to become a conditioned idea in my head. And that kind of became more and more challenging. I started building those concepts into all aspects of my day-to-day life. And yeah, I mean, it was tricky, and it made my mind probably quite an anxious brain. And then I began channeling a lot of my OCD into golf. Golf actually gave me my first insight into the world of psychology, because it's such a stressful sport. You end up getting a psychologist as a kid. And then I think that was a really pivotal reason I ended up in this world of psychology and mental health now.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We've spoken before, and something I look at a lot in my work is what can begin as a challenging situation, a challenging presentation of be it OCD, maybe it's ADHD, maybe it's anxiety, whatever it might be for somebody. We can get quite bound to those labels at times and those versions and stories of ourselves that we come to believe. But also there tends to be almost a light side to what can be challenging. It's kind of, there's strengths in the presentation of whatever it might be. So how do you feel like you've channeled that, to come back to that word, kind of, where do you feel like that perhaps has helped you in your journey?
Yeah, I mean, having an obsessive brain, the compulsive element of OCD, when you start creating fallacies in your mind, is really hard. But I think as I began to deal with the compulsive element and calm that bit down, the obsessive part of my brain continued, and channeling it into this world of dose, for example, dose simply just wouldn't be what it is. I would never have been able to accelerate it at this speed. And the main part of dose that's brought it to this point is these live experiences that we run. And the level of like analysis that I've gone into to make it what I hope is the best live experience someone could ever go to, has been so useful. So like, I'm pretty grateful for it now. Like, I think of it as a asset in my life. And I'm also very aware of what makes it worse, the OCD. So then I can like have a much better response at calming it now.
What does a neuroscientist do? Because I think a lot of people hear the word neuroscience, I think almost feel too stupid to ask what it actually means, but don't quite understand it. How would you describe the work that a neuroscientist does?
I would say it's a deep study of the research behind what impacts our brain and body and our nervous system. And in my day-to-day, I'm running Dose Lab, which is a research lab where we're studying what are the main behaviors someone can do that can elevate these brain chemicals, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. And that includes like working with a team, writing research proposals, trying to understand the literature and what is the best evidence behind these ideas. And then for me, because I like the like people-facing side, it's then sharing these ideas with lots of people.
Amazing. Let's start with dopamine. We hear it a lot, right?
Yeah, it's famous now.
Dopamine. I need more dopamine. I need dopamine.
Chase real dopamine.
Yeah, that's always a good way to get likes on Instagram. Yeah. Chase real dopamine. And then I'm chasing fake dopamine with likes while sharing about real dopamine.
It's the irony, right? I'd like to come back to that as well in terms of your relationship with social media. Yeah. It's something I think about a lot, being in the world of health and well-being and psychology. But yeah, let's start with dopamine. Sort of why do you think perhaps it has become this thing that everyone's obsessed with?
And what is it?
So humans for all of time have been obsessed with dopamine. We just didn't know it was called dopamine until recently. And the whole of Dose, for context, is built on this thing called evolutionary mismatch, which is this theory by a scientist called Gluckman, which is the idea that our brain spent 300,000 years running around in a forest as hunter-gatherers, and we spent about 30 years as modern, sedentary, digital humans. And like, it's the complete opposite. We've changed absolutely every component of the human experience. And when you look at a chemical like dopamine, now we see it as like dopamine hits from social media or porn or booze or whatever it might be. Dopamine basically evolved as this chemical that just gave us the drive and desire to do all the hard stuff that was going to keep us alive. So if you'd ask a hunter-gatherer, what is your biggest priority every day? They would say making fire and hunting for food and finding fruit and building a shelter. So they were also completely zoned in on how the hell do we get hold of dopamine. The big difference for them is they could have accessed an elevation in dopamine maybe 2 or 3 times a day, like when the fire started or they caught the animal or whatever it might have been. And for us now, we can get like 400 or 500 dopamine hits a day. So it's like a completely different world. And as a result, we're breaking this dopamine mechanism in our brain. And a lot of the symptoms we're experiencing today of depression and low mood and inattentiveness is as a result of this chemical becoming lower from our modern lifestyle.
It's like we fail to appreciate what should be incredible things every day because we're receiving so much. We've normalized things that would otherwise be considered incredible, at least in the mind of the hunter-gatherer, right?
For sure.
The fact that you wake up and there's food in the cupboard, the hunter-gatherer would have gone out and had to gather that, but it's just there. So it makes total sense. So if somebody, we're all exposed in respect of receiving multiple dopamine hits for the day, some more than others, of course. Social media plays into that. What do people do about it?
The interesting thing is like for the last 50 years, we've been able to access this like quick dopamine through like booze or cigarettes or sugar. But only really in the last like 5 to 10 years has it become super accessible through the phone. The phone is an absolute game changer for the dopamine side of things. And with cigarettes, like you could smoke a lot of cigarettes, but you still have to go for a cigarette and it'd still be a thing you were doing. Whereas phones, it's like every single moment you can just access it. And it means because the way in which our brain is getting conditioned, the phone itself is conditioning us to be more addicted to everything. So then it's making us more addicted to sugar, alcohol, whatever it might be. So I would say the solution is starting with significantly changing your relationship with the phone. And I grew up as someone that's super hooked on a phone. I got an iPhone when I was like 11. So to my whole life, it's just like being on an iPhone. And there's a little period where I got a BlackBerry, actually. I got a BBM. That was pretty fun.
It's a good time.
It was less stimulating, that BBM world, this world we're in now. And when we look at the relationship with the phone, I've spent so long trying to figure out how do people break their addiction from it and realize it's actually much more simple than the world realizes. It's really just becoming okay with not having it near you. That is actually the answer. And we at DoseLab have people coming through these processes all the time, and it can literally cut someone's screen time by 50% within a couple of weeks. If you just start having the framework of, I'm not going to put my phone next to me during every activity I do, when you're working, cleaning, cooking, sleeping, watching TV. If you develop a framework where you put your phone in another room, your instant access to dopamine starts to change, and then your whole relationship with dopamine starts to change.
What I find challenging through my own experience with exactly this, and what I think a lot of people come up against, is the initial, what can be quite significant for some people, discomfort of that. It's like we have become so addicted, for want of a better word, to the device and to these vices that there's the confronting aspect of the discomfort. And how do we naturally want to quickly soothe discomfort? Through chasing dopamine, through the phone, through sugar, through whatever it might be. So how do we support people in overcoming that initial phase of discomfort?
Yeah, and it is genuine like neurobiological discomfort, because when you come off the phone, like your dopamine is literally going to dip, very similarly to like what a hangover does. But like hangover, you have more physical symptoms going on. With the dopamine dip from a phone, it's just going to be like a apathetic, can't be bothered, like low mood type of vibe you'll get into when you put the phone down. One element of it is understanding that it's okay to not feel good. Like that is actually right. So like not feel good for a second is actually okay. Like for me, for a long time I was in the pursuit of like, how can I make myself just always feel good and feel comfortable and safe and so on. So like I used to love drinking or partying or scrolling the phone or watching porn, because it was just always keeping me feeling this like pleasurable level. And like coming away from these dopamine behaviors is an uncomfortable experience, but it's okay to be in that state, first of all. Then the other thing is like, if it's really uncomfortable separating from the phone, like I found it really uncomfortable because I was super addicted. I imagine more addicted than most people, but who knows? We're all pretty hooked these days. For me, I found that going on prolonged walks in nature was the best way to develop the capacity to separate from it, because something else would occupy like my experience, and I'd find it hard. Like I wouldn't have headphones in. I would leave the phone at home. Like if you need the phone for safety, you could have it in a bag on airplane, so like it's still with you, but definitely not like accessible easily, because you'll definitely go on it. And I found that in the initial phase of training the phone addiction, I trained it out in nature. So there was something else to kind of engage my brain, and my body was physically active and so on.
Yeah.
I'm experiencing this a lot at the moment because I work so closely through my phone. There's a few measures that I've put in place which I found really helpful.
Okay, what sort of stuff you've been doing?
The first is like creating rules around phone use, particularly in the morning.
Nice.
Like if when I wake up, the first thing I do is check my phone, I'm going to spend more time on the phone that day. So having a rule where the first 90 minutes of the day there's zero use has been really effective. And I've noticed that throughout the day, because I've taken that time to cultivate stillness, to practice being by myself in principle, it's then easier for the rest of the day. And like the evening's like a reset for that. I found that as well, that if I keep a pen and a pad on me pretty much all the time. So rather than making notes on my phone, I put it on paper, and then trying to get into the mindset of, well, when I feel the urge to grab the phone, because I'm now so aware of it because it's been such a challenge, I'll make a note of the thought that comes to mind that justifies reaching for the phone.
Okay.
Right. So like, let's say that, I'm in the kitchen, I'm cooking, the phone's over there. A thought may be, let me just put a podcast on while I listen, because that will really optimize my cooking time, right? As opposed to just being present with what I'm doing. So I'll make a note of it. Or, if I'm like, I need to check in with that person, and then trying to create, I guess, structured work time where the phone is used. I think the next level of that, and something I'd like to do next, and maybe you can advise, you think this is something that would work, is getting a bat phone. Right? Getting like a brick, like a Nokia, like an old Nokia. And then, you then satisfy that, well, what if I need to contact someone? What if I need this? And that be the phone that you then take out and about, say, and creating more space to just not have the phone nearby. Because if it's there, it's the same as diet, right? If you go to the supermarket and you buy a load of sweets and chocolate, it's going to be in your kitchen, whereas you just don't even buy them.
Yeah.
You haven't got that issue to contend with when you get home.
I think the brick phone could work. Like, I think it could be a good approach. I think it's not necessarily the answer for the mass. Like, I don't think the whole world's going to buy an additional phone.
I don't have shares in brick phones, by the way.
You should get that. Maybe I take off. I
tell you what, that's an idea.
Yeah.
Nobody copy that, by the way.
The only thing is that I think if you got a brick phone, you wouldn't use it at all. I don't think we're going on phones to call people. I think we're going on them to get dopamine out of social media.
It's true.
So I think you'd end up just not with anything if you had a brick phone.
I'll report back.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be cool. Like, it would definitely cut your screen time down big time. I think, this idea of learning to separate from it is a doable thing. Like, my screen time was like 10 hours a day. I was completely finished with phone addiction. And now I have like 2.5 a day. Like, I think that's a healthy. The other thing I would say is that not all technology is the same. If you were cooking and you wanted to listen to a podcast, like putting a podcast on your iPad or a Mac would be better than going for the phone, because the phone has this whole like novel experience where you can constantly change, and it's novelty that keeps spiking dopamine and keeps you in the loop. So it's like, I'm on Instagram now, I'm on WhatsApp now, I'm on Snapchat now, I'm on YouTube Shorts now, and it's like movement. Whereas like for me in the morning, I'll not go on the phone, but once I've done like the meditation and like some like movement and stuff like that, then I'll want to go on technology because I want to go on WhatsApp and catch up with my team. But I'll always go from the computer. Like, I won't go on the phone for ages because I know the phone is just going to lead me into the world of Instagram and stuff like that. But the computer can like provide me the ability to work. And I think for so many of us, we'll get into this about social media. Yeah. Using the computer as your way of accessing social media is a better source because it doesn't have to change. Yeah.
Let's go into social then, shall we?
Yeah. I'd also really like to come back to understanding kind of dopamine at a deeper level. Yeah, because I think we talk about, I hear a lot of, like we were joking about, kind of chase real dopamine. And I've gone on this journey, particularly slating the ice bath thing. Okay. People going, well, it's good for dopamine, so it's good. And I go, okay, well, you're now addicted to that. Okay. And you're doing that to spike it. But I also know that there's this understanding around kind of baseline versus the peaks and how it actually works. But maybe we park that and talk a little bit more about social media. Let's talk about social.
We will come to this really because it's really important. And I think ice baths serve their place in society. Yeah. I don't think they're the answer for everyone. So.
I would probably agree with you. So let's talk about social media. You yourself have a big following on socials. It's been a big part of your work and reaching people. How has that looked for you? Because I think the thing that I find challenging, and I think that's important for people to realize with this stuff, is there has to come a point where you accept that you're never going to out-muscle the way that this tech works on your brain chemistry. Like you have to come away from it. You're never going to win that fight if you're in the ring with the tech. So how have you managed that development of that relationship with social media? Yeah,
so for me, initially terribly, like addiction to checking likes and followers and messages and all that kind of stuff. And that was just not good for my brain. And it's really interesting because how dopamine actually operates with all aspects of dopamine is it works on expectation versus reality of any given situation. So if, say, for example, I had a birthday coming up and I started thinking, like, oh my God, this is going to be the best birthday of my life. Can't wait for this. Like, all my friends are coming. This is going to be so amazing. I started really hyping myself up in my head about this birthday. And then it was a good birthday, but it wasn't quite the expectation. I would actually be in disappointment because the dopamine peak that I'd set myself was up here. And even though it was great, but it was here, I'd actually experienced this level of disappointment. And for lots of different things, we're setting this expectation reality idea. What I was having with social media is I would post something and I'd put loads of effort into the content. And then I would have this idea in my head of like, I think that's going to get this X amount of views or whatever it might be. Then I would enter and sometimes it would hit the expectation. I'd be buzzing at dopamine, yeah. But a lot of the time it did not meet it. And I would end up in disappointment. And it was honestly giving me like low level like depression in my brain of just like sadness. Like, damn it, that didn't work. That didn't connect this. And then I started thinking like when I post on social media, I have to not go on social media for a while because if I go and check and then I get into the loop like, oh, maybe now it's taken off, maybe that's taken off, and then like that's not really how social media works. Like if it's not going to do well, it just doesn't do well. That's how content works. So then I started setting this rule of like I post at 3:00 just because my audience is in the US, and I then created this idea of like I'm not going to go on my phone till after I've cleaned up dinner. So I was like I'm not allowed to see how the social media post did until after dinner, and then it would give like the post longer to like gestate, if that word can be used in this concept. And I think that might be just a pregnancy word, but
I like it. It works.
It applies to the process of the post. And that started to really help. Like I'd go on and it would just be like, I wouldn't have been like hooked on it all afternoon. And then I decided like to push that to I'm now not allowed on till 10 a.m. the next day. And I post a few times a week and it would force me to have these breaks from social media. That's why I initially set the breaks up. But then I started discovering that like my mental health was so much better if the frequency of checks was just so much less. Like the frequency of checking my story views, and now we even check story likes, and we're checking all link clicks and like all this stuff you get hooked on as a creator. And I just found like the only answer is very infrequent usage of the app. So like when I go on properly, I reply to comments, I do DMs, I look at all the likes and views and all that stuff. I do all the dopamine stuff, but the frequency of engagement has reduced a lot, and that has been the answer for me.
Quickly interrupting this episode to tell you about Whoop, the wearable that tracks your recovery, sleep, and training so that you can optimize your performance. Whoop takes away the need for guessing. Gives you real-time insights so you know exactly when to push and when to rest. I've been wearing Whoop on and off for the last 6 years now, and it really is the best of the best. Click the link in the show notes below to find out if Whoop's a good fit for you and where you're at on your journey. And let's get back to the episode. Makes a lot of sense.
Jay, what's your issue with ice baths?
Oh, man. I can resonate with so much of that, by the way, in terms of the expectation piece.
Definitely.
And it actually really makes me fall out of love with social media because I can see what's happening to me. I feel shit because I'm posting and sometimes it's exceeding expectations, and that keeps me locked in. And then I'll post again and I'll be like, this is a good one. I like this one. And it flops. I'm like, I suck. And you start making it mean something about your worth. And so I think that's super valuable advice, and something that I'll definitely be taking away. As
it's even worse when you post about ice baths and doesn't perform.
So I completely agree. But I'll expand on my point around ice baths, which is that I think there is this view that just because something is deemed societally or kind of by the majority to be a healthy habit, that it can't be bad for you or addictive in some way. And I think you see people taking ice baths and going, I'm day 367 of taking an ice bath every day. I'm like, have you once stopped to consider why you're taking it on an individual day? Like, is it right for where your physiology's at, where your nervous system's at, where you're at? Are you knackered? Are you burnt out? You know, there are so many situations where it's maybe not the best thing, and people are going, well, I'm going to do it. In part because they've been told that they should be doing it, and they're just externalizing that responsibility. But also I do wonder and this is where I think my understanding of dopamine, there's probably space to understand more, because obviously you hear about these stats of 200% increase in dopamine and that it's much more sustained and long lasting. But is that good for us if we're spiking it intentionally through something that isn't, social media, but still doing that? Like, what's your take on ice baths in their place?
Yeah, so the idea behind ice baths is like almost ironic that humans have ended up in a situation where we're causing ourselves so much pain when we're living in such a pleasureful world. It's like this antithesis of the world that we're in now. When you look at how dopamine functions in the brain, dopamine basically operates on this thing called the pleasure-pain balance. It's this theory by Dr. Anna Lemke, who wrote this book, Dopamine Nation. The pleasure-pain balance is the idea that we experience pleasure and pain on a seesaw. And when for our hunter-gatherer former selves, when they're experiencing painful acts of rubbing rocks together for 5 hours to make fire, or hunting for hours, or surviving the cold, effectively pain was increasing in their brains. They're experiencing pain. And then as a result, they had to then have a pleasure response arise. Like, our brain evolved in that way so that it was rewarding us for hard, painful experiences so that we kept doing them. Because if they were just horrible, we wouldn't be here as humans. Like, we needed something to make us do the hard, painful stuff. And the seesaw operates both ways. Like, so when we experience a lot of pleasure in the brain, like if a hunter-gatherer decided, I'm opting out and I'm just going to shag my girlfriend in the tribe and eat lots of fruit, and they only went for pleasure and stopped contributing, pain would begin to arise in their brain to create discomfort to try and get them to take action again. So we're experiencing this whole seesaw all the time. And in the modern world, we are living very much on the pleasure side of that seesaw. We're significantly reducing the hard, painful actions we take each day, and we're pursuing pleasure all the time through the vapes and social media and sugar and so on. So society coming up with the most horrible thing we could possibly do, an ice bath, it actually just makes sense that we've created that idea. And if you had someone that was in a depressed, low motivation lifestyle, and they were really just in hell of like constant pleasure pursuit, then I think an ice bath could serve as like an action that's like, wow, this is horrible. This is the opposite of the life I'm living. It is going to increase the dopamine because it's like the dopamine will act in accordance to this pleasure-pain balance. And that might get them out of that like rut effectively. And like for many teenagers we train in schools, like I really promote the cold shower over the cold bath because I think it's more accessible. It's less intense on your nervous system. So I think ending your shower with cold is like a more accessible option. But for all the teenagers in schools that I train, they really like the cold shower idea. And they know that they're like lazing around on the weekend, doing very little, scrolling TikTok all day. And it gives them a bit of momentum. So in that situation, I think it's beautiful. I think in a situation where you're maybe on the other side of life and you're working super hard and you're like doing loads of exercise and maybe you're like moving towards burnout or like over stress of your system, then I think ice bath's the opposite of what your system wants. I think you'd want like warm baths and like saunas to try and calm you back down. So I think it's like got its place.
Yeah. And I think it totally fits with polyvagal theory and the nervous system, right? And to kind of break that down for people listening and watching, this view that there's this kind of fundamental understanding of the nervous system, kind of entry level understanding that we have stress and relaxation. It's these two branches. Polyvagal theory suggests that we have high arousal, that kind of high intensity state that you've spoken to there of burnout and overstimulation. And we also have low arousal, freeze, shutdown response. And I always say to people when they ask me about ice baths and the nervous system, I go, if you're down here, if you're in lethargy, struggling to get out of bed, then that can be a really good thing as a bit of a kick up the arse. But if you are already running it on the gas, then it's probably not the best thing to do. So degree of self-awareness and introspection required to understand where you're at and as a result what's right for you in that situation. Which is what I think is probably the biggest underlying issue with the use of this stuff, is that most people are fundamentally disconnected from how do I feel and what do I need. Agreed.
And you can get addicted to the pleasure hit the ice bath gives. Like, it does really wake you up and you get this like rush from it. And for periods in my life, like that was useful. But then I think it's like really closely like observing your nervous system and like thinking like, does it need to be like more excited or does it need to be calmed down? And like we're all on a different like place from that point. It's a really useful analogy. Yeah. What other brain chemicals should we be aware of and what's useful for people to understand when it comes to stuff? Yeah, so dopamine is this like pleasure, hard-working chemical. You're either going to get it from pleasure hits or you're going to get it from hard, effortful actions. Like you can get loads of healthy dopamine from deep focused work, reading, cleaning your home, anything that gets you like into your flow state, into your like deep state of focus is beautiful. So that's the world of dopamine. Then you have this oxytocin chemical, which is like starting to be understood by the world now, but I think it's still like quite new to the world to fully understand. Oxytocin is this chemical that evolved to connect humanity together. It drives our desire to build loving relationships basically with people, and then also the loving relationship we can have with ourselves. And for the majority of human evolution, like all these chemicals were perfectly optimized, these four chemicals, like 25% each. So we were doing hard stuff all day for the dopamine, but the connection with the tribe was so essential to survival. Whereas we're now living in like a dopamine dominant world where the majority of our time is spent in the pursuit of progress or pleasure. That's like really where we're spending our time. And like relationships and love and connection and gratitude and these like really nice calming feelings are not as a bigger priority for many of us now. So oxytocin is this movement towards how much love am I experiencing day to day. That makes a lot of sense. Like we're going out, it's almost you're going after dopamine and it's at the expense of oxytocin. So the two, that makes sense. So how would someone shift from a progress, like build dopamine kind of focused lifestyle and leaning more into oxytocin? What are some of the practices that someone could do? Yeah, and just to add on that really is exactly what's happening in terms of dopamine is taking control. Because like even if you took a relationship scenario, say someone had been in a relationship for a few years and then like the sexual connection had reduced a bit, as it like does over years of time together. If someone then decided to start watching porn instead of having sex with their partner, which is very common these days, underestimated how common that actually is, then they're getting dopamine when they're watching porn and no oxytocin from no sex. So you're like, that is where society is at on many of this stuff. And if you think in the evening, like if you're socializing and like kind of socializing through social media by like messaging people and sharing stories, stuff, that's dopamine. If you're hanging out with humans, that's oxytocin. So this really is at play. Like big makes a lot of sense. And remind me of your question, the actions for oxytocin. Yeah, so we move more towards oxytocin. I think one of the things to understand is like it's a slower experience of pleasure, the experience of like love and connection with a human being, and we've got hooked on like waiting for our next like big high. But it's okay to like have the more mundane, slower hits of happiness, which will be oxytocin. So like if you're having like a nice conversation with someone where you're being like open, that's not like a big pleasure hit, but it's like a nice moment for you, and it's calm, and it's great for your nervous system, this oxytocin. If you smile at a stranger on a dog walk, that's oxytocin. Like it's fleeting connection. There's this brilliant theory about fleeting connection from Yale University with this lady called Gillian Sandstrom that basically shares people that have moments of connection with people that they're not familiar with in their local community. So like asking a barista, how's your day going? And smiling at someone on a dog walk or a cashier in a supermarket. People that do that experience a lot more happiness in their brain day to day. So it's like this slowing of your nervous system and being like okay with like focusing on like slow, intimate conversations with humans, basically.
I think there's something that I've been practicing, and I got this from a friend of mine. She's super American, so she's always complimenting people at random, and I love it. But she's the happiest person I know.
Interesting.
But she's complimenting people constantly, and I asked her, like, why do you do that? She's like, because it makes me feel good. She's not even thinking about the other person. So it's something that I'm aware of, especially when I interact with people in restaurants. I've got restaurants. I've worked in the industry. And I know how stressful it is for the guys a lot of the time because I speak to my teams, and a lot of people come to restaurants. They're not necessarily treating the staff so well at times. So when you go into a restaurant or a cafe and taking that moment before you order to say, how are you? So, I'm good. And you may say, I like your tattoo, I like it, whatever. That change in them and in you. And then the next person that comes along, they're then being met with that same energy. It's like
ripple effect.
You feel great. And it's a slowing down, because very often we go into a cafe and we're thinking, I've got this meeting in 15 minutes. I've got this straight after. We're going, just get me my coffee quickly. I'll have that and that, go. Just that 5 seconds of just stopping. How are you? And really connecting with someone, looking in the eye.
Definitely.
It makes such a big difference. And I'm so happy I witnessed her doing that and adopted it. It's really helped me.
I think as well, sorry, mate, just on the American versus British piece as well, I wonder, obviously a lot of your audience is in the US. Do you notice a difference in how they relate to some of these things? As far as I definitely feel like British culture is a lot more insular, introverted, quieter, less open, less forward, and less kind of forthcoming with this.
You would feel silly to go into a coffee shop and make it like, hey, how are you? Like,
I feel like people, if I smile at someone on the street, I think they think I'm a psychopath.
Yeah.
I'm like,
that's the sad world.
In London in particular.
Oh, mate, you try and speak to someone on the tube, they think you're homeless. It's like, what is going on?
I think it is getting a bit...
It's wild. How silent the tubes and trains are. It's so weird. Like when my parents were like going into London, like everyone used to be chatting on those trains. Yeah. Now it's just boom, headphones in, like no.
The other day there was a family, they had 3 kids with them on the tube, and the kids were laughing, joking around, and like I was in the mood to enjoy that. I was like, oh, that's so nice. I saw so many faces, like people going, right, headphones on, and then the parents get all worried and anxious, and they go, shh, quiet, don't play. And it's like, what are we doing?
It's interesting here because you said that ripple effect of the compliment thing, and what's so fascinating about oxytocin is it's the only brain chemical where you can increase it in someone else. That you can't do that with anything else. I can't just boost your dopamine unless I chuck you in a cold lake. But I can't like boost your other chemicals through anything else. Like, it'd be your responsibility to increase them. Whereas oxytocin, when you do something that contributes to someone else, and it can be complementary, it could be like anything, picking someone up from an airport and helping them out, like anything that you do to help someone else in their life, making someone food, listening to someone for a period of time. You're increasing their oxytocin and yours. And this idea in our head of like much more thinking about the collective and thinking about each day, like how am I contributing to others, is really significant. And for me, when my mental health was my worst, I realized I was like so in my own head about my own experience of life, so analytical of my own experience and like how am I shaping up in this world and all that kind of stuff. And when I started really thinking about like other human beings, you actually like get out of your own head, and like it's a really big difference. And it might be that your work gives you the opportunity to contribute to other humans, but maybe your work doesn't, and you could do it in your personal life more. But really like outwardly thinking like how can I get oxytocin through contribution is magic for the brain.
Yeah, I think it's gonna, I imagine, become a theme of the conversations we have here, because we spoke with Maya about this last time around the nature of wellness and personal development is very self-oriented. It's very much like, how can I optimize my brain chemicals? How can I fix my body, fix my breath, fix my nervous system? It's very kind of me. And lots of people doing great work in terms of talking about community, co-regulation. But do you think that perpetuates this kind of disconnect that then perpetuates the problems that people are facing?
In terms of the desire to solve your own problem?
Without thinking about anybody else.
Yeah, I think that is a big challenge. And like, the world is, from a survival standpoint, so easy now that we can just think about ourselves all day. Because like, we know, like, I know my mum's going to eat today, so I don't need to think about my mum. Whereas if I was a hunter-gatherer, like, I would have to be thinking like, is my mum going to get food today? She can't hunt, she's 60. Like, that's how my brain would operate with all aspects of like living, would be like, how is this group going to stay alive? And because survival is taken care of, we are getting like quite selfish day to day, and like, how can I just make myself feel great? Whether that's like addiction to like success in career and money, or it can be like addiction just like pleasuring your brain. So I do think it's tricky. And I think for me, like, long periods of time, and I always come back to this, long periods of time out in nature on walks without your phone, where you like actually think like a bit deeply about life and being a human, and like what kind of impact you're having on the people around you. Like, when I was looking at oxytocin, I realized and came across this work that when you're really engaged in a conversation and you're asking good questions, like, it's really important for the quality of connection and then oxytocin as a result. And I suddenly realized that with my dad, for example, like, my dad is so interested in my work and career. So he's so great. When I see him, he asks me so many questions. But I had this realization in my mind that like, I never really ask him much. And I was like, wow, that's awful. Like, one day I won't even have my dad, and I've like not asked him enough questions. And then I started thinking, like, in day-to-day conversations, how often am I talking about myself in conversation, and how much am I like really getting that person talking about themselves? And it's really important to start thinking about these ideas and thinking like, how can I like bring someone else out and like get lots of connection and get them this opportunity to share, so I can just listen.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that. Serotonin.
Yeah.
Serotonin. We hear that a lot as well, don't you? See serotonin a lot.
Like, serotonin has definitely been known about for a while. Like, we've obviously had like the whole SSRI medical side of serotonin, and it's a beautiful chemical, serotonin. It is predominantly produced in our gut. Like, as we know now, like 90% is produced in our gut. And it's a chemical that wants our body to be calm and happy and well fed and well rested and getting lots of sunlight and breathing nice and calmly. And it's a chemical that is not getting those things. Like, the opposite is occurring. We're breathing in a stressful way. We're not very well rested. Our food isn't as good as it once was. We don't get as much sunlight. So humans are really struggling with a big deficit in serotonin, particularly in the winter months. We get it even worse, and there are cool ways that we can boost it up for sure.
Let's go into those. I think that'd be really helpful. What are some of the ways that we can boost the serotonin?
I would definitely start with nutrition and start thinking about this idea of single ingredient foods. I kind of have started calling that based on it being the opposite of ultra processed food. Like, ultra processed food is a big phrase now. That ultra processed people book, I think, like really woke people up to even your 20-gram protein yogurt actually being full of crap, even though the front of it sounds like it's going to make you healthier. And when you're eating single ingredient foods, you're like fruits and vegetables, meats, fish, eggs, yogurt, all this kind of stuff, like single ingredient yogurt. It's so good for the production of this serotonin chemical. And I think that's definitely the starting point. Serotonin just wants us to live in the most natural way we possibly can. And like, I think food, when you begin to get the nutrition right, like, it translates to lots of other aspects of your desire to live in a natural way.
100%. Yeah, it's almost like we've come so far in terms of progress, but actually a lot of the things that we need to do now actually take a step backwards, right, into a time where things were a lot more simpler. If we can take that lens, it's actually like going for a walk without my phone, going back to single ingredient foods, spending time in connection with the tribe, talking. It's actually a return to a lot of the things that we've been doing, as you rightly said, pre 30, 50 years ago, very easily. It's almost like, can we take the best of both? Can we take the relative safety that the world offers today, but then re-engage with some of these more traditional ways of living? It seems like that's a pretty good step, a pretty good frame that people can take when they're thinking about what to do.
Yeah, and I think like humans right now are just like in the pursuit of becoming AI robots, basically. It's like where we're heading as a species. And like, I think that may come with cool things. I think it's going to come with complicated things. But I think as we go on that pursuit of like massive optimization, innovation, we can't just like forget 300,000 years that brought us to this point as well. Like we did do something else for that time. And with the hunter-gatherer idea, people might think like, oh yeah, but my grandparents weren't hunter-gatherers and they might not have struggled with this stuff, or like 100 years or 500 years ago. A lot of this stuff has just changed. Like the food system, for example, has just changed. In the 1990s, the whole tobacco industry realized it was falling apart and they bought the entire food industry. Like no one even knows that. And they literally bought all these food companies and reimagined food into the most addictive product it could be. And like you go back 50 years and like people weren't struggling with like big issues with under and overweight because like food was naturally satiating us and we had good relationships with the quantities we were consuming. So yeah, I think lots of the solutions are like in our past effectively.
Let's talk about the book, The Dose Effect.
Yeah.
I'd love for you to give us an overview. What can people expect to learn? Is there any key parts that you want to pull out and talk about?
Yeah, there's in the book, I've basically tried to make it as easy as possible to journey through it. I think choosing to read instead of scroll your phone is like the hardest thing ever. And even like for myself, like I'm aware of these ideas and very often the phone will win that battle. And reading itself is so good for your dopamine. It's this idea of slow dopamine increase. Like when you go on the phone, you experience this like rapid increase and then a big fall in dopamine. When you read, it takes like 10 or 15 minutes to actually enjoy that experience. So it increases slowly, which is really good in general for dopamine, the act of reading. And then I've kind of chunked it out and made it really visual so that that is doable. And then how the book actually operates is there's 20 behaviors that boost these chemicals up. There's 5 within each chemical: dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. And as you journey through, you basically learn the function of the chemical, the behavior itself to increase, and then you complete challenges either on your own, or it always recommends you do it with other people, the challenges, given everything we've just talked about. And I hope as someone journeys through it, like they really do see a big shift in these areas of how motivated they are, their relationship with their phone, connections, energy levels, and then their ability to manage stress.
With reading, you almost have to read to get into it to start with. You almost have to read whatever you enjoy. I think a lot of people approach reading with like, what's the value exchange? I'm investing 20 minutes here. What can I get out of it? Therefore, I have to read nonfiction. Yeah. For me at the moment, I'm really enjoying reading fiction.
So good.
Because I'm enjoying like that presence that it gives me. I just want to touch on, we haven't spoken about endorphins.
Yeah.
And endorphins is a big one again that you hear like, I want to train for the endorphins and I've definitely said that without knowing exactly what endorphins are. So it'd be great to break that down a little bit.
To put the explanation of this chemical on you, why have you done the hard did you say you've done marathons or some kind of extreme exercise stuff?
So again, through this conversation actually, and it's something I've been thinking for a while, like, wow, why am I putting my body through this? The last I've done 2 main challenges this year. One was the world's hottest marathon in the Saudi desert in August.
Nice.
And one was 7 ultra marathons in 7 days across 7 Emirates, 350 kilometers in a week.
Wow. And
when I think about why I chose to do that, there was an element of like wanting to suffer, like and to feel good after suffering.
Yeah.
There was something about a collective pursuit because there was a group of 7 of us.
That's really cool.
Doing it.
Yeah.
And it was the adventure of, going from one emirate to the next. We start running at 3 a.m. We finish running hopefully around 8, 9 a.m. We then pack up, drive to the next one. Logistical challenge, like, organization, diet, all those things in between, which made it interesting.
Yeah.
But ultimately, to suffer. And when I question, well, why did I want to suffer? It's because of the feeling of success afterwards. Okay. Ironically, what happened was as much as my body was broken for probably 3 months after I finished, I was actually quite depressed afterwards. There's probably a period of 2 or 3 weeks where I realized what a crutch training had been for me. And I couldn't train for 3 weeks. I could barely walk. And after the high came a big low.
For sure.
And I've been reflecting on that to the extent that now that I run for pleasure, never more than 5 or 10K, if I'm honest. I love doing track because I'm in and out, but I'm not enjoying running any kind of distance at the moment.
Interesting. So I do think it's really cool. Like the accomplishment itself is really cool. I think if you were to say like you want to do that all your life, I think that would be risky for your body. I think it's like massive to pull something like that off. So I think there should like definitely be an element of like achievement and celebration in your head. In terms of endorphins, this chemical basically evolved to help us cope with pain, both pain in our brain and pain in our body, and also stress. Like stress and pain are very interconnected, and like you'll find stress quite painful as in your mind. And we were faced with only kind of physical difficulty from that point of view. Like we were either starving and we had to just like hunt until we found food, or we were faced with like physical danger and some kind of threats, like an animal chasing us. And in the moment that the animal chased us, we would physically exert our body hard, really hard. And endorphins would come in to take any pain out of our body. So like a stitch, like you can't have a stitch if you're running away from a bear. Like you got to just get on with it. Whereas if I had ran as fast as I could right now for a mile, I'd probably get a stitch and stop. Not if you were chasing me with a knife or something, like because endorphins would save me in that moment. And also stress in your brain, like would be massively relieved so that you weren't running away screaming, you were just like zoned in. And it's a very useful mechanism to have this chemical that can de-stress our brain and take pain out of us. In that moment there, like there will be an element of like, maybe that was like taking some pain temporarily out of your system whilst you're in the pursuit of like physical pain that your body was going through, rather than like maybe like challenges in your mind that you've navigated, whatever it may be. And there's an element with like extreme exercise of getting hooked on like that being the thing that's the solution to the pain you might be navigating. That being said, in our day-to-day life, like the stress and pain that comes our way from just like work stuff and money and whatever it might be, endorphins is like such a useful chemical that can de-stress us extremely quickly. And like in my head, I always know like if I have a very stressful day or I get some like bad news that's like frustrating or whatever it may be, I know like physical action is a really good answer to that. And after we have physical action and endorphins, our body then begins to relax. And like, for example, like with the breath work and calming the body, I think calming the body is obviously so important for the nervous system. But I think sometimes if you've had something particularly annoying and stressful, our body used to respond with physical action first and then it would chill out. So I think like a really good solution would be like some physical action, like a walk, maybe running, maybe like gym, whatever it might be. And then like coming home and then really trying to regulate the nervous system and go into like a super chilled vibe. But yeah, I think if you're in a stressful period in your life, endorphins are very useful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that kind of movement of energy, right? Of getting it out of your system before you then try and sit still or relax or calm down is such a useful tool as well.
So can I add one extra?
Of course you can. Yeah.
Because this only just came out, this paper, a few days ago, and it's so interesting about dopamine and serotonin. And as a complete dopamine addict myself, this is a good answer that like can really help. They've just basically discovered that dopamine and serotonin are actually operating on an accelerator and a brake mechanism. This paper just came out in the journal Nature, and like to get a paper into Nature is like the hardest thing in the world. So like it's a very reliable source. And what I mean by this accelerator brake mechanism is when you're pressing the accelerator on dopamine, a brake is being pushed on serotonin and vice versa. Serotonin is this lovely chemical that calms us and lifts our mood, and dopamine is this great chemical that makes us very motivated and hungry for more. Both have their like service for us as a species. But in our day-to-day life, we are all dopamine hungry. Like we're waking up and it's like, how am I going to be super productive today? And how am I going to get loads of pleasure when I do have my pleasure from sugar or social media or porn or whatever it may be? But not only is that creating the dopamine challenges that it is creating, a pause is being put on this serotonin chemical that calms us. That in mind, if you were to really hard press the accelerator on serotonin, a brake is also going to be put on dopamine. And when I was trying to solve a lot of my dopamine addiction, the answer was these long periods of time in nature in the forest and doing breath work and breathing and like focusing on my sleep and eating clean. But what I didn't realize is in the pursuit of putting serotonin down, my desire for dopamine was reducing. And now I'm seeing this as a framework in my mind, literally in the last few days, but this time I'm going to approach this weekend, is like, can I create like a serotonin Saturday or a serotonin Sunday that's like a big experience of serotonin, like a lot of nature for a prolonged period of time with really clean food and napping and breathing, like all that cool, calm, chilled, natural stuff. And can I pause dopamine for a day? Because I know Monday to Friday is going to be very dopamine oriented. Like I'm going to be on my phone lots, I'm going to be working really hard, and that's okay. But I think having this idea of like, can my weekends be really serotonin focused could be like a magical concept for the world.
I think it's this idea of like, again, intentionality, understanding yourself, and then pulling the levers at the right time. Because it might be, right, I've got to finish this book. I need dopamine. How can I go about actually supporting that process as well and facilitating that healthier relationship with dopamine and serotonin, and how do you balance those two together? So
that's a movement in that Serotonin Sunday.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Everyone out into the nature.
Yeah.
For the sake.
Yeah, exactly.
And even if you're in like central London, like you can get a tube to like Richmond Park or whatever it should be. Like you can still access these things.
Absolutely.
And the world needs the nature for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
Well, TJ, this has been eye-opening and fascinating. Before we wrap up, we've discussed a lot. We've covered a lot of ground, and hopefully it's all been accessible. You've done a brilliant job of that in the book and here and in all of your work. But for someone going, oh God, that was a lot to take in, a lot to take on board. One piece of advice, one thing that people can take away from this conversation, if there was something maybe you're going to put on a billboard or whatever it might be, where would you leave people now?
So I would leave them with the sentence, take action when you wake. I would write that on a big billboard, take action when you wake. And that means not going on your social media and having an easy experience of pleasure as the first thing. And it's so easy to go straight. And I count all of the phone as social media, WhatsApp, email, it's all dopamine, or Instagram. And tomorrow morning, just try this on one day. Like you got a whole life ahead of you. Doing this once is okay to test it. And you wake up, you ideally don't have your phone charging by your bed. You charge it the other side of the room. And if you really needed some kind of noise to get to sleep, you could be playing it from the other side of the room, or you could use like a tablet and listen to Audible. Like if that's the answer to and needing an alarm and all that stuff, there's like a barrier to not having the phone by the bed. You can solve it with other tech. You wake up, you get out of bed, you go straight to the bathroom, you start brushing your teeth. So you're doing something slow and boring. No one likes brushing their teeth, but then dopamine is rising naturally. You splash cold water on your face, you go back and make your bed, you have your shower if you would have a shower, and then you just start your day before you enter the phone. Like, so maybe you need to start working, maybe you need to help the kids make their breakfast, whatever it might be, but you do stuff before the phone and you get momentum. And it's so unbelievable what that then does to the rest of your day and ultimately your relationship with the phone, because the hardest moment to be going on the phone is when you wake. And if you beat that moment, you suddenly have this beautiful capacity to beat it in many more moments as your day goes ahead.
Love that.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for having me on, guys. I loved it.
To have you here. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We'll see you next time.